OneClimate.net. We've got to drag you away from Hugo Chavez's speech making and references to the smell of sulfur still in the room and people being disappointed with Obama. When that makes it a natural question for our next guest, who's Erich Pica, President of Friends of the Earth US, who's here monitoring the talks and presumably lobbying and putting in what you can. But the question of the moment is these statements today, these opening statements, not just by Obama, but by Brazil, by China, by several countries. What do you make of it? What's your first reaction?
I think between the United States and China, we continue to have posturing, trying to figure out how each country can get the best negotiated political outcome going from Copenhagen to potentially Bonn in a 6-month negotiating track, or ultimately into COP15 in Mexico. So this is a lot of political posturing. From the United States' point of view, I don't think it's helpful. I think President Obama's speech, was great on the rhetoric, but on the details as to what the United States, as the world's historic emitter of global warming, is actually going to do beyond the 4% reductions by 1990 and what I would consider very little finance to the rest of the world, including the developing world.
But he did set out what is the US position, has been expressed over and over, and said, well, we are committed to reducing emissions. We're operating at a different speed and we'll end faster than we began and so on, but we'll all meet in the same place. I mean, that seems to be the line that the delegation is saying. So he's still saying we're in there, it's just not necessarily in there with you in this particular agreement.
Well, I think the problem with global warming gases and CO2 right now is that it keeps on accumulating at a rapid pace right now, that we quickly get to the breaking points of many of the ecological systems around the Earth. And so we may be on a slower path, but the planet doesn't care. Right now we are loading the atmosphere with global warming emissions and CO2 that are already ice glaciers to melt. It's causing desertification. It's causing extreme weather patterns. And so we're seeing the impact. So this slow but steady approach, and we'll meet you at the end, Friends of the Earth US, we're not sure what the end will be and whether or not we can actually pull ourselves back from that at this point. I mean, the climate is showing changes right now and impacts right now from the CO2 that we've already emitted into the air, and we're going to put more into it from the United States point of view.
You talk about the posturing, and for me that was one of the disappointing things. I mean, the posturing also comes in the 3-minute statements that the leaders who are already here were making. They come up to the plenary and they go up to the platform and they make a 3-minute statement, and there's not much in them. That's not real negotiation. So we thought this section with the top guys here might have a little bit more. And that's what struck me, is that there was very little substance. There were some good speeches, but very little substance, very little new. And again, they seem to be restating positions. And maybe that you've raised an interesting point here, and another couple of speakers after Obama mentioned that negotiations to come, they were already thinking about, well, this isn't great here in Copenhagen, but the talks will go on, which I guess is a good thing in one way. They're not saying, well, it's all broken down, we end here. But the talks will go on, and let's keep trying. So there's a sort of glimmer of hope there.
I think there's a small glimmer of hope. Unfortunately, we've been in this negotiating track since Bali, right? The Bali action plan was designed and developed specifically to bring the United States into a UNFCCC framework. And so we've been talking for 2 years. The Bali action plan was something that was established by President Bush, and now we have President Obama walking away from it right now because he wants a political agreement, because the certainty's not there. Well, the world doesn't need a political agreement right now. We need a binding emissions reductions from the United States, Annex 1 countries right now. And the political agreement ends up being a face-saving exercise for this conference and for these negotiations, but it's not a planet-saving exercise, and that's what we really need right now.
But realistically, we're not going to get it here, are we?
Unfortunately not. I think we have spent 2 weeks here at this conference essentially negotiating around each other and not talking about what is really the needs of the world and the needs of developing countries to have a just climate deal.
I guess the question is, though, that here we've had Obama, we've had the Chinese premier, Lula, one or two other speakers with some quite good speeches, nothing breakthrough in them, but they've got to go away and talk, and I think the idea was that they would get together and issue some sort of declaration, however broad and general, and then maybe say to their Sherpas or their bureaucrats, well, go away and fill in some details here and come out with something that looks reasonably convincing. But can they do that? They've all stated their position. Obama was also, and quite strongly in a way, Obama was hammering on about transparency, which is to do with getting India and China to commit to inspections. You know, you say you're cutting back, but are you really? And they, of course, not very happy with that. The developing countries are saying we've got to have development. That's absolutely our number one priority. We can't be just sort of banished to permanent poverty. So they go away from this. They've got a few hours, not very long. Can they all now get together again and still hammer out some sort of general political statement that the bureaucrats can follow? Can they do it in this time?
Well, Friends of the Earth US has seen a draft political agreement that was circulating around last night. I believe The Guardian has actually posted that on their website. So there is a draft agreement that's an agreement between, I think, 26 countries. The problem with this agreement is it excludes the other 170 countries that are here at this conference trying to negotiate a just climate deal. And it'll be interesting to see as we go forward throughout the day and maybe in tomorrow, what is the process for approval for this political agreement? Will it be a consensus-based process, which is some of the foundational work of the UNFCCC and how decisions are made? Will it be a majority rule or just the rich countries rule? Because right now it seems like it's the rich countries are going to rule.
But most of the countries of the 26 or whatever presumably are in the negotiating blocks, the main blocks who negotiate with one or two countries out on their own like the US. So presumably when they were drawing up this draft agreement, they would have it in their minds that they've got to go back. Say China's got to go back to the group of 77 developing countries and say, well, we've signed up to this and we think this is good for everybody, and what do you think? And they have a little chat about it. And so they must have had it in mind. So it's not entirely just this group excluding everyone else. It's up to them, the signatories, if they're not the signatories, they haven't signed, but who've worked out a draft agreement to go back and, as it were, sell it to the rest of the African countries, to the rest of Asia, or in Europe's case, whoever represented them, to the rest of Europe. So do you think that's feasible? They must have had that in mind, mustn't they, when signing on?
I think they may have had that in mind, but there's also been this macro blame game that's been created. The U.S. going after India and Brazil, or India and China. You've got the African group that's been really pushing really strongly for 1.5 degrees Celsius and a significant financing package, more than $500 billion annually. And the United States and some of the EU have been, using China and India, as well as the demands from the developing world in Africa, to begin framing this blame game. The transparency is a key way that the U.S. is trying to frame the blame game. And so if they get we hope there is at least some sort of movement forward. This political agreement can't allow the developed countries, the United States and EU, to get off the hook for strong emission reductions as well as strong financing. And I would hope that the developing countries that are seeing this see terms like $100 billion annual financing by 2020, no real commitments to emission targets, a political pledge that is that says we will try to avoid the 2 degrees Celsius. These are all real buzzwords saying that the developed countries of this world are unwilling to create development space, climate space, and financing space for developing countries that are not responsible for this problem. And that is the fundamental problem with this process, the fundamental problem with the United States' engagement in the UNFCCC at this point, and it's a fundamental problem that I hope we'll solve sometime.
My colleague Jeffrey Allen is here too, also from the US.
We've seen a lot of coverage in the last 24 hours or so, news coverage, U.S. media outlets reporting a story that developing countries are blockading the talks here, and developing countries, whether they're demanding too much or whatever the story is. How do you respond to that?
This is once again the blame game that's being used by the United States. What the developing countries are asking for, they're saying that the United States, the rich countries of the world, have basically exploited the Earth's atmosphere, and we have emitted more than our fair share of global warming gases into the air. And there's only so much left. There's a carbon budget. There's only so much space left for the rest of the world. And so what they are saying is that we are the poorest countries of the world. We're the ones that are going to be impacted by climate change and the impacts of climate change the hardest, and we're going to be the least able to compensate. And so what we want from a fair climate deal is really strong emission reduction targets. You saw countries seeking at least 40% reductions from the rich countries, as well as a commitment to a 1.5 degrees Celsius reduction. And you saw a demand for substantial financing to come to for the developing, because frankly, they've been exploited in this entire process. So they are negotiating for their lives and their livelihood. And to say that that is being outrageous in their demands is quite hypocritical of the countries that have already, the rich countries that have already taken those resources away from them.